In this downpour, Roger would need his coat to go home, even if it meant he might get caught by the others in the office and need yet another excuse why he really couldn't join them for a drink. And yes, he was aware it was a Friday night. He was ready for the onslaught, but when he jerked the metal cabinet open, Duncan flew out and Roger clashed back onto the bench. "Found you!" Duncan sang and uncurled his fleshy mass from the warping metal doorway. An arm, a leg, the theremin twang of flexing metal, coats tumbling to the floor on their hangers. Roger fell to the floor and winced at the dangling genitals thrust into his face. Duncan bounded away before anyone could catch him, though his bare frame was somewhat of a deterrent against wanting to catch him. Frank gave chase nonetheless, and Matt watched from the curb, the pair of them oblivious. Frank came back red and panting, his features contorted and clutching a stitch in his side. "Lost him," Frank said through heavy breaths. "Looks like you've got a full face of bollocks there this time, mate," Matt said, with his one gold tooth flashing as he grinned. "Don't even," Roger said, and raised his hand to block any more words. "Wish I knew who that naked arsehole was," Frank was, breathing more easily this time. "Dunno, but it's not exactly growing on me." Mac took his coat from the cabinet floor, grimacing at its encounter with a middle-aged man's buttocks. "How the fuck does he get in without us catching on, eh?" First, Duncan had hidden in the bin, then it was behind the tyres, and now the cabinets. Roger left the office before they could say any more, wincing at the thought Duncan's antics might dominate conversation at the Crown that evening. Roger had forgotten his coat in the muddle, but took his time in the rain. His t-shirt clung to his chest, trainers squelched around dimpled toes, and heavy wet jeans scraped his thighs. He fumbled for his keys and dripped on the doormat of their poky flat, standing for too long, stinging, readying himself, not sure what he would find. A stench of salt and vinegar waved over him first. Roger squinted to make sense of it. Duncan was standing on the coffee table, bolt upright, naked, burning eyes. Plates, wrappers, and half-eaten food trailed to the kitchen. Duncan jumped into the air and planted his feet on the coffee table, rattling the room with his sallow, thin figure. He didn't want to, but Roger screamed forward and crashed Duncan onto the sofa. Duncan sprang back, ready to wrestle like a skinny white sumo, and Roger crushed one of his fingers, upturning the coffee table to escape. "Nobody wants to see your junk," he yelled, and swung again. Duncan bounced off the sofa, sending crisps flying. "Put some clothes on." Duncan dodged a punch and buried his fist into Roger's ponytail, dragging him through the debris, nearly snapping his neck. Roger grabbed an upturned ashtray and jammed the glass corner into Duncan's big toe, ripping skin from nail until Duncan let go. With one big leap, Duncan flipped in the air and landed to bury his balls in Roger's face. With each saggy bash, Roger inhaled sweat, pubes, and biscuit crumbs. He bit his way out and rushed breathless to the kitchen, ponytail half loose, stinging, picking pubic hair from his lips. Duncan rolled on the floor, clutching his balls. "You said you wouldn't do that again," Roger said, and rinsed his face. He spat into the filth of the sink, removed hairs from his tongue, and cautiously removed his hairband, easing the stinging, feeling heavy with sweat, filth, and sadness. Red patches throbbed on his arms, and his hand was bleeding. Duncan rose from the floor and gave one of those wheezing laughs. That was a good one. Blood, sweat, and melted chocolate streaked his sallow skin. "You're fucking insane," Roger thought to himself as he trailed the half-finished sentence that had been said too often. Duncan took another leap and slapped his ass on the counter onto ketchup and crumbs. His light smile made everything else seem that bit more grotesque, but at least it was over for now. Roger limped through the rubbish and barricaded himself into the bedroom with 2 heavy bolts. He clawed saturated trainers from his feet, threw his t-shirt onto the floor, and peeled jeans from chapped legs. Semi-naked in the dark of the sash window, the breeze washed everything away. Across the street, under the canopy, hypnotic pub chatter suspended him from the deranged filth on the other side of the door. With one finger, he pulled up the string that dangled from the outside hook and untied the whiskey from the end. Rainwater from the square glass bottle was scooped to wipe his face, armpits, and groin. Then he unscrewed the lid to drink. Aching, he lay on the bed and lit a cigarette. The tip glowed in the darkness, then routinely fell onto his bare stomach, burning then cooling. Duncan was of a mind to leave Roger for a while. He lowered himself from the counter and took the jar of Nutella from the cupboard. He crunched over debris to the sofa, brushed crisp fragments from his bare thighs, then stuck his finger in the jar and gave the chocolatey goo a firm lick. With his fingers still brown and sticky, he tapped out an old music score in the air, a neat little polka that had some physically satisfying patches. He remembered quite a lot, really. You must show your technical range, his father had insisted on that one pivotal day. There was much talk of closing off the room, using the Play El Grand, and mainly keeping Roger out of the way while the audition took place. Duncan hadn't cared for music, really, but there was very little space to consider anything else when there were 14 antique keyboards in the house and your father kept an entire library with nothing but sheet music on the shelves. Siphoned off into the West Room, he played over the sound of creaking floorboards for the bald man with the briefcase. The music swelled into the corners, starving the room and folding back on itself. It was hard to know why it had pleased everybody so much. Music had become like wallpaper to Duncan. It was just ever present, not something to actually garner attention. He's got a lovely touch on the keys, the bald man said. When he had gone, his father had leafed through the Royal College prospectus. That couldn't have gone any better. His fingers were wrapped around an evening whiskey with just one large ice cube. He dozed off by the firelight, his grey hairs flickering in his nostrils. With his father sleeping and Roger still hiding in the attic, Duncan slipped from the bulging heat of the log fire and took himself to the top floor, where he could breathe more easily in the cool of the great floor-to-ceiling arched window. He surveyed what felt like his father's kingdom in the dark night of Sussex. The old church and priory were just visible in the distance, two firm straight silhouettes towering amid the softer outline of surrounding forests. Each wooden panel creaked around him, and it spurred him to go downstairs, walk through the smoky stench that surrounded his sleeping father, and into the rookery for the wire cutters. He went at the inner harp in the Carametti Grand first. Each chord sprang into a curl with a satisfying twang, sometimes lashing his face. With every accelerating cut, he became more reckless and breathed more deeply until exhausted, aching, at peace, he splayed out on the floorboards, euphoric, staring up through the dark high windows, elated by what he had done. The manor lost 5 pianos that way, and their father would not live long enough to see even the first of them repaired. Roger remembered it differently. He slept through the madness and didn't encounter the scene until morning. It felt uneasy when he awoke, almost sensing the chaos. Then he heard their father tearing through the building, an erratic tornado shouting into space. When Roger emerged onto the landing balcony from the attic, he looked down at his father 3 floors below, holding fragments of keyboard in blooded, angry hands. Split wooden wires littered the central hallway and staircase. Roger hurried. A mercury bolt shot through his veins. Duncan's half-naked body was limp on the lower staircase, face swollen, cuts everywhere, so many colours of blood saturating his torso and jeans. Roger dialed 999 from the West Wing phone, but he has no memory of how he got there or even deciding to do that. That was the beginning of it all. Roger could not have imagined back then just how many more times he would need to dial for help, or that in later years, just as he was doing now, he would come to not even bother. Duncan was descending again, and Roger's facade to the world was on the brink of collapse.